Y'all, have y'all seen Straw by Tyler Perry on Netflix? Okay, this is a spoiler alert. I'm giving you a fair warning right now. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to be discussing everything about it, including the ending. So this is your warning to get out now. All right? Warning served. There it is. So I want to do a review of this movie from the perspective of a Black trauma therapist. So my name is Antoine Mackenzie Plesd. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and qualified supervisor in the state of Florida. And my specialty is in grief and trauma work. Specifically, my specialty is in the experience of traumatic loss, which is what this film is all about. Now, I'm already giving you a spoiler. So again, if you have not seen it, you may want to skip ahead. But anyway, I first want to start with just giving my qualifications for my perspectives. Again, this is a personal but also a professional review. But these are my views. Again, I am a licensed mental health counselor, and the bulk of my work is in helping people to process traumatic experiences and to move beyond them in a healthy way. I happen to have lived and professional experience in traumatic loss, which is when we lose someone in a very unpredictable and scary way. As a matter of fact, I even wrote a children's book on the topic. The name of the children's book is Kareem Learns to Cope with Traumatic Loss, available on Amazon. Slight plug. And so I'm giving you this review from that perspective. So let's just first off rip give Mr. Tyler Perry and the entire cast their flowers. And I will be honest with you guys. While I have nothing but tremendous respect for Tyler and what he has done, I am not a fan of all of his work, right? And I'll be honest about that. I am not a fan of all of his work. But to me, this was masterful. It was masterful not only in its storytelling, in its direction, in its acting, but it was masterful in the multi-level layers of conversation that it's going to create for the Black community, specifically for Black women, around mental health and the experience of traumatic loss. I'm excited for the conversations that this movie is about to spark up around the world, around the country, in our communities. And I also see this movie being used in the future to train therapists, to train community leaders on various aspects of traumas, specifically dissociation, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But the first thing I want to just say is kudos to Tyler and the entire cast, and I hope that they get their just due. I hope that they get nominated for an Academy Award. I hope that they get NAACP awards for this because it was masterfully done. All right. So first topic I want to get into is just the imagery of the struggling Black woman, the single mom with a special needs child who is trying to make it all happen all on her own, and the sometimes isolating experience that can be in our communities. It showed us how this type of woman is often overlooked, often unseen, unheard, and I believe that the character even expressed that sentiment in the movie. I think she said, no one sees us, no one sees me. And so it follows the story of this woman who is just trying to make it happen, as Black women do, and against almost insurmountable odds. She has this special needs child who requires a great deal of medical care, really expensive medications and all of this stuff. She's working multiple jobs, trying to make ends meet. She lives in poverty, and is facing all of the usual suspects around the trauma of poverty. But in addition to that, she's a single mom, and it looked like she had very little, if any, community around her to support her. And I think that that's a familiar experience for most Black women, unfortunately. As the story goes on, she is encountering all of these different members of the community who, again, just do not see her. And I think that this film does a great job of lifting up that conversation, helping us to be a little bit more conscious, present, and aware when we're in the presence of people that we might think are beneath us. You know, here this poor woman who is just doing the best that she can, and she's struggling. And it appears that almost everyone in her life, from her landlord to her boss at work, just don't seem to see the effort that she's putting in to try and keep it all afloat. And everyone is placing their own demands on her. She's behind on her rent. We find later that the landlord evicts her on the day that all of this stuff is going on with her, and evicts her in a very mean and nasty way, just throwing her stuff out on the yard. That day she also ends up getting fired. She has a boss at work who, you know, just really only cares about what needs to happen at his place of business, and doesn't really take into consideration all of the things that she has going on in her life. And so, you know, that was tough to watch. So in the beginning, it started out as almost like a typical Tyler Perry story of the struggling Black woman who is facing all of these insurmountable challenges, all while trying to maintain a positive image. Well, and here's where the spoiler comes in. She's going through all of these things. She ends up in a legal situation. I'll try not to give too much away about the movie, but she ends up in this just unbelievable situation at the end of the day, where she ends up harming someone and ends up being misunderstood. And I don't want to give too much away, but she is just in the craziest of situations, all because in her mind she just needs to make it to payday so that she can pay some money to the school to keep them off of her daughter's neck, to keep them off of her, and to pay whatever she owes in rent, so that she doesn't get evicted. And this is kind of the whole premise of the movie, that she is just trying to make it to the end of the day so she can get this pressure off of her, and feel a sense of relief. Well, that doesn't end up happening. There's a series of events. Side note, when we realize that the check that she's waiting on is only about $520 something, you know, that really puts into perspective the dire situation that she's in. She's getting pressure from everyone. One of the things that I thought was interesting was how even under all this tremendous amount of pressure, she still finds moments to see other people. So there's a homeless guy, or housing insecure guy, that is played by Sinbad, the comedian, who kind of hangs out in front of her apartment building. And she is the only person that notices this guy, and does, even out of her own lack, she does what she can to help him. right? And so that's a whole other topic. But it speaks to the nature of us and of black women, you know, that despite what they're going on, what they have going on, they end up being sort of the caretakers and the nurturers for the entire community. All right, moving on from that, we then see the importance of seeing people, not just looking at the circumstances, but really seeing people and having empathy. And that was expressed, I think, in at least 2 different characters, but there were several characters who finally, by the end of it, began to actually see her, to understand that it wasn't about just her actions, but what got her there. What kinds of experiences in life can cause a person to quote unquote snap. And so Tiana Taylor plays the role of a detective who ends up being the negotiator that speaks with her. And the beautiful thing about this character is that because of Tiana Taylor's character, the detective, because of her lived experience, she has a level of empathy and understanding for this woman that none of the other officers really get at first. And she's looking into this situation, and because she has been in those shoes before, she kind of understands what the woman is going through and understands how to connect with her and gets her to cooperate on some level with the police. Again, I don't want to give too much away. But I thought that character was very wisely chosen in this story, because it shows that especially those of us in position of power, the things that we've been through in life and these unique experiences that we go through in our communities can be used for the greater good. But we have to be willing to turn on our empathy, to see beyond the facts, to see the truth of a person's experience. And so there's a whole message in that. There's also the character that Sherry Shepherd plays, who also is just kind of a salt of the earth kind of person, and is able to not only see and feel what this mother is going through, but has also taken the time out from her day as an executive to build relationship with this character and with many women in the community like her. And so, but even her, at some point in the movie, she is so busy with work and life that Taraji approaches her for help, and she's not able to help. Not able to, but just didn't in that moment, because she was so busy with other things, didn't see the signs that this woman was in crisis. All right. Side note about the word crisis, and this is important for this review. We are in a mental health crisis when our circumstances exceed our resources to cope, right? When we are in situations where our circumstances, the stress of those circumstances exceed our ability and resources to cope, this is when you find yourself in a mental health crisis. And I think that some people, based on that definition, might say, well, if that's the case, then I feel like I'm in crisis most of the time. And that is what we see happening in this situation. Now, here is the spoiler. Remember, she's doing all of this to get something done for her daughter. Well, we find out later in the movie that this whole time, the daughter actually had died the night before in the hospital. I think they said she had some sort of asthma situation or something like that. The daughter has actually died the night before. And so we find out later in the movie that what actually happened was that the night before, when the daughter died in the hospital, Taraji's character dissociates. All right, and if that is a new word for you, look it up. Dissociates, which means that she loses contact with reality. And this is something that happens when we are in a mental health crisis. At times, in our minds, we feel so overwhelmed with what's happening in front of us, especially in a situation of traumatic loss. We feel so overwhelmed with it that we, in our minds, think that we need to escape the reality. And it is not something that's done at a conscious level most of the time. It is completely unconscious. But again, it's when that circumstance exceeds our resources and ability to cope with it that we resort to these extreme psychological methods of escaping the situation. So she dissociates and she goes home, goes to sleep, and the next day she wakes up and in her mind it's business as usual. So we come to learn later on in the movie that all of those beginning scenes where she is interacting with her daughter, she's actually actively hallucinating. She has lost complete contact with the reality that her daughter died the night before. So she's having visual, auditory, and tactile hallucinations, meaning she's seeing, hearing, and feeling even things that are not really there. There's moments where I think she's like hugging the daughter and she's bathing the daughter, but the daughter's not there. Okay, and so we then also later find out that there is mental health history in this woman's family. And this is where we get into a conversation around epigenetics. That your genetics are not the end-all be-all. It doesn't necessarily 100% of the time happen that because your family has certain mental health issues that you will express those genetics. But given the right circumstances, or I should say the wrong circumstances, given the opportune environment for it, if we are put under enough stress, then we can, in those moments, express those genetics. And that's what happens to this woman in this situation. When we hear about someone who has snapped, you know, what that means is that there may have been already an underlying mental health issue, maybe in the genetics, but they had done a really good job of coping with it as best as they could for a really long time. And then there was just this one incident where, again, the mind felt that it was too overwhelming to deal with, and boom. And I'm not sure if the family's issue was schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. I'm not sure. You know, he doesn't go that deep into it in the storyline. But there is some sort of mental health history in her background, in her family lineage. And this is the situation that kind of pushes her over the edge. And the big takeaway from this is that she could have been any of us. And what were some of the things that might have been able to prevent this? Well, if she had had community around her. You know, I left that movie thinking, how is it that she left from that hospital and went home alone and woke up the next day alone with no family or friends around to help her stay grounded in the reality of what happened? How did she go through an entire day without anyone calling to check on her, to say, hey, this horrible thing happened yesterday. How are you doing? This is where community comes into play. Community can help us to stay grounded in reality. Imagine if her sister and her mom had actually decided, you know what, no, we're going home with you tonight. What just happened is really traumatic and you should not be alone. Or what if they had said, you're coming home with us? If she had awakened, even in that dissociated state, if she had awakened the next day and saw people around who are not usually around, people who could talk to her about what happened the night before, perhaps it would have prevented this mental health crisis from happening. And so, again, I didn't want to make this too long of a video. It's already 20 minutes. But this talks about the need for community, seeing people, understanding when people are going through things like traumatic loss that they should not go through these things alone, because unfortunately really bad things can happen when we are forced to navigate these kinds of situations by ourselves. And so I often say that as people of color, we learn, grow, and heal in community. And so the biggest takeaway from this is how community is really important in navigating this whole mental health conversation. We need each other. We need each other for support, for guidance, and to help us stay grounded. Because that's what this character really needed more than anything else, was to have someone around to help ground her in reality. There are so many more elements to this story that I could go into, but I don't want to make this video even longer than it already is. But share some of your insights in the comments. Let's continue this conversation. I would really appreciate it because I can see, as I said, I can see this movie being used to educate us on so many levels. All right, this has been Twan the Counselor, and I had time today for your and my mental health. Light and love always. Peace.